Hello, good evening, good morning. I'm Sadiq, and this is the Unit 7 podcast on new imperialism. In this podcast edition, or version, or whatever you want to call it, we are discussing new imperialism and its consequences around the world, in Europe as well as the areas it colonized. So, stay tuned. So, what exactly is new imperialism? Well, to understand new imperialism, we first have to understand old imperialism. Before the 1830s, imperialism was mainly defined by colonism, also known as conquering, settling, and directly ruling territories like the Spanish in Mexico and the French in Canada. This model was influenced by a lot of mercantilism, which saw economics as a zero sum game where, in order to be rich, someone else had to get poor. But by the early 1800s, capitalism began to make a larger impact on the world, and new European economies needed raw materials to keep the industry functioning. So they got thinking. What they came up with was new imperialism, more focused on resource extraction and much less on settling. No need to put in the effort to conquer and assimilate the locals. Now you could get all the benefits of colonization with half the effort and slightly less genocide. For example, in India, the British kept the existing caste system and allowed local rulers to keep their land as long as they were loyal to the crown and paid their taxes. This worked wonders for stability, as a local population was much less likely to rise up against their local ruler than an outsider, and the already established system made resource extraction a breeze. If the local population ever put two and two together and realized who was really pulling the strings behind the scenes, they would have to deal with the British Navy, which could just. In 1680, India was the beating heart of the world, full of vibrant cultures and new technologies. The Mughal Empire in the north ruled the richest kingdom on earth, and Indian products were some of the most valuable in the world. The Portuguese had long made a profit buying and selling Indian goods to Europe, but their activity was mostly just an annoyance limited to the coast, and the Mughal army could usually just smack around any uppity Europeans trying to go inland. But the money that Portugal carted back to Europe inspired more Europeans to go to India to take a shot at the seemingly infinite money pot. Over the next 100 years, the Dutch, France, England, and Spain all went for a ride on colonization carousel, but the British East Indian Company was eventually able to bully everyone else out of India and invaded the province of Bengal to flex on the French. From here, they exploited on succession crisis and civil war to yoink half the subcontinent, and by the time the Mughals figured out what was happening, the British had taken Delhi and captured the emperor. The most confusing part of this whole situation was that the king and the parliament had specifically told the company not to invade an empire the size of Europe, but one look at the company bank account showing 10-figure profits made sure that the order was more like a polite suggestion. And it wasn't like the government could stop them anyway, because by the 1780s, the company had an army of over 1 million Indian soldiers loyal to the company and the company only. Now that the EIC was in charge of 1 Europe worth of land and 2 Europe's worth of people, and with no one to oppose them, the company shifted from trade to tax collection, and since they also owned the farms, they were able to farm cash by growing indigo and tobacco and mining ore and gems. All of this money flowed directly out of India into London to the point where the treasury was literally overflowing because they didn't have anywhere to put all of the gold. But it wasn't all sunshine and rainbows for the British, because they slipped up and managed to offend both Muslim and Hindus by making bullets out of animal fat. That 1 million man army they had rebelled and swiped half of the northern provinces. Although the EIC was able to resolve some through bribes and whatnot, the British government didn't like the idea of the EIC. And you could imagine, because it was a super powerful state with a massive army and a near total control of trade, just barely under their control. So the rebellion was an excuse the government was looking for, and in 1858 Parliament dissolved the company and took over direct control of India until 1949. But while India was not able to avoid colonization on the other side of the continent, another nation saw that they needed to get with the times or end up like the rest. Japan in the 1800s was in the best place. 3 centuries after the Tokugawa shogunate won Japan Battle Royale, the country was basically the same as it had been in the 1500s. But this would all change in 1853 when America showed up with some boats and said, "Open up or else." Seeing the big boats and even bigger guns on those boats, the Japanese realized that they had no chance against the Europeans and had to open up to the world. This caused massive change in Japan as the people realized how corrupt the shogun was and started asking questions. Where did these boats come from? Why don't we have them? And why do we still have samurai without any wars? To his credit, the shogun did try to change, but by this point it was too late, and a small rebellion in the south snowballed into a full-on civil war. Seeing an opportunity to make profit, the Europeans sold weapons to both sides, but with the help of the samurai and some French mercenaries, the rebels were able to capture Kyoto and restore the emperor, ending the shogunate. This started a period called the Meiji Reformation, when Japan was able to speedrun 4 centuries of European technologies in just under 30 years, overhauling the economy, military, and society up to speed, and by 1890, Japan was a modern nation able to compete with the West. They even adopted colonialism, nabbing Korea in 1892 with the logic of, it wasn't us, it would have been someone else. But they weren't done yet, because in 1894, a small skirmish with Chinese border guards escalated into a full Chinese invasion of Korea, and Japan got a chance to really show off. Since the Chinese were overconfident and thought this would be an easy in and out operation, they moved slowly, which allowed the Japanese Navy to land Marines in the south, and the Navy went on to absolutely clobber the Chinese fleet and clear a path for the Marines to speedrun the 300 miles to the Chinese border and capture Port Arthur, forcing the Chinese to surrender and completely upending the 3,000-year-old power's dynamics in Asia. This victory and the later victory against Russia in 1905 Russo-Japanese War officially made Japan a great power and firmly cemented their control over East Asia. This allowed them to create a new Japanese empire based on European imperialism.